White has the water pressure. White has the maintenance package. Blue covers.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll get going now. Right. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. And my name is Nick Rutter, for those that haven't met me before. At the moment, I'm kind of leading the committee for Sinter. Just for people who are quite new to this, Sinter is kind of an international organization to try and bring together like-minded people interested in snow science. So a very broad remit. And one of the key things we do is we meet 4 times a year to provide seminars that are hopefully of interest to the wider community. And that's no more so than today. So today we've got John Pomeroy and Rodica Nitu from INARCH and the Global Cryosphere Watch, respectively, talking to us about their organizations. In particular, you know, these are significant organizations for snow scientists in terms of data that's collected, data that's available, but also, I think more importantly, the scientific aims and objectives. It's also always useful to try and put a name to a face and a bit more of an understanding to an organization rather than just an acronym on a website. So we're enormously grateful for John and Rodica spending their time today to talk to us. The pro forma is going to be that we've offered John and Rodica about half an hour to speak with at least 10 minutes questions. So this seminar will run for an hour 20 roughly, but that should give us lots of time for discussion and hopefully it would be very enlightening. So with that, I think, John, you're going to start. If you could take over the presentation. And if people want to put anything in the chat, we'll try and collate that as it goes. And we can use that for discussion as well at the end. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. And it's great to see this group. This is seeing some of the faces and names. These are the most impressive and favorite people in the world to me. So this is great, and thank you. I want to recognize Chris DeBeer, co-author on this talk, and anyway, I'll get into it in a second here. We'll start sharing the screen and get the slides over. All right. There we are. So I wanted to talk about the international network for Alpine research catchment hydrology, which is actually something that formed informally before it was formal. And it was simply a way that some of the scientists that I knew and others, and Danny Marks was a big motivator behind this at the very beginning, as was Matthias Bernhardt and Karsten Schultz. And simply, okay, how do we link our research basins together in some way so we have some better comparability of our observations and, you know, share our best techniques, share our disasters and cautionary tales, and then also start to jointly, where possible, develop models together and start to evaluate these models on the various basins with the hope that some of these could be adopted for more global applications, looking at the importance of mountain snow and ice and hydrology and hydrometeorology to the global Earth system. And so that became INARCH, and INARCH is now actually into phase 2 as a formal program. So the what is it now? It's a cross-cut project of the World Climate Research Program's Global Energy and Water Exchanges Project, GWEX. And GWEX has a hydroclimatology panel which we're project approved by and governed by. And so our objectives really are to better understand alpine cold regions hydrology, improve the prediction of hydrological processes in these environments, and to find consistent measurement strategies. It's grown to 50 research scientists who run 29 experimental research basins in 14 countries around the world. And not every scientist associated with INARCH is a field scientist. Many are modelers, and some are working on the remote sensing end. But the idea is everyone comes together around this with a common interest around that core of the research basins that we build up from it. And we completed our 5-year term. We were approved back in 2015, and now into a second one, which will take us to 2026, and some different science contributions. So just a bit of history of some of the meetings. On the upper left-hand side, you'll see the first meeting in Kananaskis, Alberta in 2015, something like that. And so a motley crew in there. You'll recognize many of the faces as we got going with that. We found interesting further locations. Here's one on the upper right in Grenoble, France, hosted by Vincent Vionnet and others from the tremendous French mountain snow and ice science community in that area. Here's one in the lower right, Zugspitze in Germany, so up at the top of Germany's highest mountain in February 2018. And so Matthias Bernhardt and Karsten Schultz hosted that. And so we're up at high elevation with high level discussions. And then the lower right is in Chile, in a high mountain area, Portillo, which is hosted by James McPhee, and simply a superb area. So that's those were our in-person meetings. And then what happened after that. We had COVID, but and the global pandemic. But I'll get into our more recent online meeting. These are some of the participants. These are all of the participants who are linked into INARCH. And certainly it's something, if you're interested in joining up and have some contributions, particularly if you have a research basin or a model or both, or clever remote sensing approaches to these things, then we would certainly like to talk to you and bring you into it. Is very much not too much of a formalized membership. It's based on interest, and so what do we but this tremendous group of individuals have linked to basins that have been formally adopted by INARCH. And we have 29 on the map here. So you'll see a cluster in Western North America, stretching from Colorado and California up to the Yukon in the Northwest, in South America, through Chile, through the high Andes, but also have discussions with Argentina and the Mendoza region. In Europe, in the Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden, in high mountain Asia, stretching from Nepal into China, across the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau region, in the Caucasus with Russia, in New Zealand, and then through the Alpine Europe from southern Spain, the Sierra Nevada up to the Pyrenees, and then across the Alps. So it's a tremendous number of basins and different environments, and they're similar and different in many interesting ways, which makes them very useful. And some are glaciated, some are more snowmelt dominated, some have forests, but all are essentially cold basins in some way, and all are instrumented with some lengthy set of instrumentation, and ascribing to the idea of making this publicly available and shareable. The data requirements, and this is the wish list. It's not completely strict, but we want to see openly available, detailed meteorological and hydrological observations for at least 5 years of continuous data at hourly sampling intervals for the meteorology, perhaps daily for precipitation, and less frequent for stream flow, snow, or glacier mass balance surveys. And as much of this as is possible together, ideally spatially distributed, but that's harder. And then also using atmospheric model reanalyses to fill in data and downscaling climate models through various means as well to help regionalize the data as much as possible. So so anyway, in phase one in INARCH, we grew to about 50 scientists, 29 basins, as I mentioned, but there were significant advances made by these scientists in understanding and predicting the high mountain water cycle, substantial contributions to many international science initiatives, organizations, but also coordination and sharing of information across INARCH, which I think has helped all of us in many ways. And even if it's moaning and complaining about a snow sensor or the difficulties of getting out in the field when the pandemic hit. We also put together a special issue of Earth System Science data on hydrometeorological data from mountain and alpine research catchments, and 23 papers submitted to this. So really, really good contribution there from around the world. So that was wonderful. The one thing we did was work with and help WMO to host a high mountain summit in Geneva, which had representatives of 44 countries from around the world, and these several days of scientific discussions and policy discussions, and really recognizing that we are creating an unprecedented climate in the crisis in our high mountain Earth system, but it also that there's tremendous needs of people living in mountains and those living in river basins downstream of the mountains need to have access to and use of fit for purpose hydrological, meteorological, and climate information. So it has to be useful in some way. And so that declaration was made by the all 44 countries there. And also promoting a new initiative, integrated high mountain observation, prediction, and services initiative that would be organized as collective intensive campaigns of analysis and forecasting demonstration in high mountain headwaters around the world. And so particularly that last item is something we thought, well, perhaps INARCH could help in moving the IMOP initiative forward. And so you'll see a bit of that as we get forward, as I discussed later. The special issue on Earth System Science data was Danny Marks, and then Ignacio Lopez Moreno came in to help edit towards the end after Danny retired. And 23 papers in. It's still kind of open, so if you have a mountain data set that you'd like to publish and describe, then contact the editors and say you'd like to get it into the special issue, and we'll still handle it. And but it was a wonderful collection of data sets put in there, and because then they're published and you get citations from these things, so it's good for the authors, and then it's good for those who need good modeling data sets to compare to. And some of the INARCH basins have supported model intercomparison projects led by Richard Essery and others, around which I think have been helpful to the international modeling community in more realistically representing high mountain processes and exchanges in their models. I'll talk a little bit about some of the modeling we're doing at the Center for Hydrology at the University of Saskatchewan, where I'm based. It's just a little window of what INARCH work is, but one thing we discussed at the meetings is that our high mountain water models need to account for the spatial and temporal heterogeneity in mass and energy fluxes. And here's an example. This is just a LiDAR snow depth map of the Kananaskis region of the Canadian Rockies in Alberta. And so you can see where the snow has been deposited by avalanching, where slope and aspect have a tremendous influence on things. There's a glacier in here as well. forest cover in the valley bottoms down here, lots of drifts, blowing snow drifts and cornices along the Alpine region and drifts into the tree line area. And obviously the impacts of variable wind flow on complex terrain. So variable wind flow, variable radiation, all this is going on. And a few years ago, I think Richard Esri coined the term snowdrift permitting, that we really needed to get scales down to the 200 meter or less scale in order to pick up the drifts of snow and the cornices in the high mountains. And that was at the Grenoble meeting, and examples of these models are out now by Vincent Vianney is one, and I'll show you some examples from that. One model that has blowing snow and avalanching and snow interception and slope and aspect in its results is CRIM, the Cold Regions Hydrological Model. And this is coupling Danny Marks's snowbow model for snowmelt energetics as well. And this is some work that Ignacio Lopez Moreno from the Pyrenean Institute of Ecology in Spain did, taking a small, simple alpine basin, with some slopes and a head wall and a stream coming down the middle, and then just putting this at many of our INARCH basin locations around the world, and then a few other basins, forcing this with reanalysis data over many years, and then perturbing the reanalysis data to look at the sensitivity of two things in this example. In the upper slide A is looking at the sensitivity of peak SWE per degree Celsius change in temperature. And so you can see some very low sensitivity basins in high mountains in Eastern Canada and Arctic Canada and the Yukon and Svalbard, and then places with very, very high sensitivity to SWE, to warming down in the Andes, in the Eastern Himalaya, in the Sierra Nevada in Spain, and Lebanese mountains, Australia and New Zealand. So lower sensitivity in others in high mountain Asia and parts of the far north. But it depends a bit on regional meteorology, depends on the peak precipitation season in here. So it's not a simple cold versus warm story. It's latitude, it's radiation, it's local wind regimes. It's also the local humidity, whether it's a very humid or very dry environment, and all these affect that sensitivity. Interesting, we also see sensitivities to the annual snowmelt rate. This is just the average snowmelt rate over the melt period, and very low sensitivity at some of the colder high alpine areas. So to warming. So why would this be? Well, the thing is that some high mountains, the snow melts out before the summer solstice. And so if you warm things up, then the snowmelt period is shifted into spring from summer, and the melt rate slows down. But in other environments, the melt is occurring after the summer solstice. And so the melt rate is shifted to a higher solar radiation time of the year with warming, and the melt rate doesn't decline so much. It actually might increase a little bit, or at least it's a mixed, depending on the elevation of the basin. So again, we see very high sensitivities in the Andes, in South America, and some of the Mediterranean mountains and lower, and in the Western US. But as we get into colder, drier mountains, lower sensitivity. So it depends on the timing of melt rate as well. So one size doesn't fit all. One model we've been developing, and Chris Marsh has been behind this, Vincent Vianney, myself and others, is we call it the Canadian Hydrological Model. And this is to specifically address snowdrift permitting modeling. And so it has a variable mesh, a variable resolution mesh applied, which goes to very, very small triangles around alpine ridges and very large triangles in valley bottoms where topography is less variable. And this has the physics of blowing snow put into it in 3 dimensions. It has a variable complex terrain wind flow model coupled to it. It calculates mountain shading and slope and aspect impacts on radiation for melt, forest canopy, interception, sublimation, as well as subcanopy melt effects into it. It has avalanching built in from an algorithm from Bernhard and Schultz. And and it has various options. It can run snowpack as the snow model. It can run snowbow. It can run FSM as the snow model in it. So various options. It's a modular approach, but it's specifically designed for high performance computing system with massively parallel structures. And so this is just an example of what the mesh would look like over the area west of Calgary, Alberta, into the Bow Valley, and Canmore's in here somewhere. What we wanted to do is see, all right, can we take something like that and have resolutions as small as 100 meters to capture these snowdrifts, but then run it over a really large area? So we said, well, let's run it over Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Montana, Idaho, and Washington State. And that's about 1.3 million square kilometers. So that gives us, would have given us 3 billion raster cells if we had just kept to the 100-meter resolution, but we were able to simplify that to just 34 million triangles using the variable mesh approach. So that speeds things up quite a bit right there. We went down to 50-meter length scales in this one rather than 100, and we broke them up based on elevation, forest canopy type, and water flow, because eventually you want to put a hydrological model into this whole system. We forced it with Environment Canada's HRDPS forecast system. It's 2.5 kilometer forecasting, forecast forward for 2 days and just hourly time steps there. And so that's reissued periodically. So it's really a coupling between Environment Canada's GEM atmospheric model and the CHM model. And in this example, just running it from October 2020 to June 2021. And we used 800 CPUs in this. Took about 20 hours of wall clock for an annual simulation, so it's not too bad. We have a degraded operational forecast available at snowcast.ca that you can take a look at and play around with a bit. Anyway, we wanted to evaluate this, and so Jobang Louvre took the weekly snow-covered area from Sentinel-2, resampled this to 150 meters over certain sections of this where we had it available, and then we took the grid cells from HRDPS CHM to look at the snow-covered area from each. And there's no calibration to CHM in here. There's no nudging. It's just run. We didn't have Landsat 8 available for this. And as an aerial evaluation, it wasn't too bad. They weren't exactly the same, but they were capturing largely the same cycles and seasonality to snow-covered area over this region, which suggests that, okay, there's perhaps some validity to this. We had also previously tested CHM over a small scale where we had LiDAR imagery available in the Kananaskis region of Alberta, but it's good to see that a large swaths also produce a reasonable output. And I'll just show you the what the simulations look like. This is running a whole year over that area. You can see British Columbia into Washington State, bit of Vancouver Island out there right into spring. And I'll run it again, but it's snowing, it's calculating phase, it's blowing snow, avalanching, canopy interactions, and then downscaling snowmelt energetics to various points. So, and then when we, what's interesting is that this takes the simulation right up into the heat wave of 2021, which started to really melt the snowpacks very quickly. So that's an example of some of the modeling going on as well. See if we can get, there we are. Okay, we wanted to meet in person. We tried to in spring of 2020 in Spain, didn't work. So we met online in 2021 in October on Zoom. So lots of smiling Zoom faces there. And but the talks and presentations were really tremendous. It showed that people have been keeping very, very busy over the pandemic period. And you can go to the website of INARCH. It's inarch.usas.ca, and then you can get into the online workshop and see the some of the results presented there. So that was very nice. We came up with a statement at the end of the workshop, really saying, okay, wonderful, we've completed our phase 1 science plan. We have a suite of well-instrumented research basins. We have high resolution forcing MET data sets. We've advanced snowdrift permitting and glacier resolving hydrological models. And from a variety, far more than I've just shown you. And these could be exemplars of what integrated high mountain observation and prediction systems could be. So, so then we've taken these IMOPs and use them to improve our scientific understanding, to evaluate observed changes, data, and models around the world. And we're starting to use these to estimate the sensitivity of the high mountain cryosphere and hydrology to climate change. We need to next provide common and archived observations for basin diagnosis and modeling, and we proposed a Common Observation Period Experiment, or COPE, which actually starting now. We propose to enhance basin observations with novel and more sensors, and so we have groups working on that as part of COPE. We want to improve downscale and correct atmospheric forcing data sets using our basin observations. We usually find that we need to bias correct the atmospheric models to make them really useful in simulations, and our high altitude observations are crucial for doing that. That we can develop, improve, compare, and apply multi-scale, high-fidelity cryosphere hydrological water management models. And we're just starting that, but there's that shows great hope. And also, we finally recognize our human beings, that we can and must work with communities to help them develop plans to predict future water scenarios, build their own capacity, enhance forecasting systems, answer questions on water futures, and evaluate the sustainability of proposed water management solutions. And there's a crying need for this around the world. And so we want to work with people more than and demonstrate the usefulness of our science for humanity. So from that, we developed a new vision for INARCH for the next 5 years, that we would improve mountain hydrometeorological and related observations, understanding, and predictions, as we have been doing. We would start to implement recommendations from WMO's High Mountain Summit, particularly on integrated observation prediction systems, and then try to answer the question, how can we build up these IMOPs and apply them to larger systems that derive from mountains? That we wanted to provide science for society. Can we contribute to the development of fit-for-purpose information services in high mountain catchments, at least relating to our areas of our own expertise? And then noting that mountain systems around the world include human-water interactions and complex ecological interactions. And whether it's the danger of avalanching from something like this, or these trees growing at high elevation and perhaps indicating a change and rise in the tree line in this image. And so, can we use our understanding of human and ecological interactions to develop solutions to help achieve water sustainability in high mountain river basins and downstream? So that's a new vision for INARCH. We set 3 objectives for phase 2 based on this. And I'm showing INARCH photographs contributed by INARCH members from around the world. So you're getting a great world tour here. But the first is to better measure and understand high mountain atmospheric, hydrological, cryospheric, biological, and human water interaction processes. Second, to better improve their prediction as coupled systems. And third, to diagnose their sensitivities to climate change and propose how they can be managed to promote water sustainability under global change. So those are lofty objectives, they're challenging objectives, but hopefully we can do it. We propose some science questions that we might answer, really looking at how different are the observation and measurement approaches amongst our basins, and do we expect distinct differences in our understanding because of data sampling schemes, data quality and quantity, or are we seeing true differences here? That's a crucial one as we move forward. Second is, how do the predictability, uncertainty, and sensitivity of energy and water exchanges vary with changing atmosphere, ecosystem structure, and water management in various high mountain regions of the earth? Third is, what improvements to high mountain energy and water exchange predictability are possible through improved physics, coupling, downscaling of models in complex terrain, and improved and expanded approaches to data collection and assimilation. And fourth is, to what extent do existing model routines have global validity, or to what extent are they transferable and meaningful in different mountain environments for providing some service to society? And then the fifth, can mountain systems be predicted and managed to find solutions to help achieve water sustainability in river basins under climate change? And we hope to, perhaps not in 5 years, but eventually contribute to the grand question of how have mountain, atmospheric, cryospheric, hydrological, ecosystem, human systems co-evolved to their current states, and how will they respond to climate change over the next century? And that's something we really need to get a hold of as we face unprecedented global warming and water pressures, water supply and use pressures around the world that will be increasingly relying on our mountains to sustain food, energy, and drinking water for humanity, as well as keeping our ecosystems going. So we start with COPE, a common observing period experiment, recognizing that winter is in a different time of the calendar year in the north and southern hemisphere. We start in 2022 in the south. We focus on obtaining high quality measurements, ensuring that our sensors are working, enhancing our extra observations at the mountain research basins. These could be airborne LiDAR, UAV, acquisitions of various types. We run high resolution models, generally atmospheric models, and then eventually surface models. And then work together to compare processes, data, and model testing in these environments. So you see there's a COPE page on our website, talks about that a bit. The COPE basins, you see the red dots for the existing INARCH basins around the world, but we've had really good discussions to add a few more to them as well. So there's really an expansion of INARCH from the Bridger Range in the US to the Savannacoca catchment in the Andes in Peru, to the high Atlas Mountains, the Rodica catchment, the Kozul Glacier in the Western Pamir Mountains in Tajikistan, and the Hidden Valley in the Himalayas. So, so that starts to expand it quite a bit and makes it very, very interesting. And it's great to include Africa now in INARCH. So the COPE, the current status is we're collecting metadata and developing the data management system. And so we're Global Water Futures is contributing the data management system through the work of Stephen O'Hearn. We're deploying the sensors. We've exchanged information on sensors and systems to be used at multiple sites. For example, I'm going out next month to the Kozul Glacier in the Pamirs in Tajikistan with a group from WSL in Switzerland to help them and advise on commonality, so it's comparable to some of the other INARCH basins. We have a steering committee with some names, many of which will be familiar to you, and key to have some more. And then we put together lists of data sets that are available and things like that. So imagine the incredible remote sensing validation capabilities or model verification and the validation possibilities that COPE may provide as we get all this together. And we just need the pandemic to settle down, and hopefully it stays settled down during this so we can keep going out into the field. So I'll wrap up there and just say that, yeah, it's for INARCH, it's observe, predict, maybe protect. And here's some art from the artist Gennady Ivanov, who's been painting some of the INARCH basins around the world. So I'll stop sharing there and see if there's any questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, John. There's incredible geographic breadth in the basins and what's going on. If anyone wants to type a question into the chat, please feel free. I'll kind of summarize them and put them to John. If you want to make a question, just put your hand up. I'll lead with a question that came into the chat as you were speaking, John, from Martin Schneebly. It came in quite early. He was saying, does the open INARCH data include digital terrain?
It's certainly part of the biophysical characterization of the catchments that we hope is available, and recognizing though that sometimes the INARCH investigators aren't the ones who own the digital terrain data, but at least point to where it can be found and make it available where possible. In some cases, people have flown UAV over their basins and or will have flown LiDAR of some sort, and we'll have some high resolution data sets available that are often more useful than the lower resolution that's typically openly available. And where those exist, then we encourage people to make those available.
That's great, thank you. I can't see any hands up, but I've got a question. So on a number of occasions, John, you talked about the necessity to make the data and the products useful or fit for purpose, was the term you said, for the people living in the communities and around. Have you got any good examples of how that's worked really well, where people have been able to potentially as well, not necessarily leveraging federal infrastructures or large scale stuff, but where smaller groups can get data from catchments and make it really fit for purpose for the people locally living in the communities that matter?
One example perhaps is in Yukon Territory in Canada. The Wolf Creek Research Basin has been running for, I believe, 30 years this year as an instrumented catchment. And so that's lots of scientific discoveries there, a few models developed and other things going. It's currently operated by Sean Carey of McMaster University. But within Global Water Futures, another group decided to set up a Yukon River Basin model using the MESH hydroglaciological modeling platform, which I didn't talk about, but anyway, is suitable for continental scales. The parameterization of MESH was derived from the many papers published in Wolf Creek over the years, and MESH uses a land surface scheme and a very physically based model. It's now providing on an emergency basis operational flood forecasting system of the Yukon River Basin for the Yukon government. And this is in a region 10% larger than the United Kingdom. The modeling was set up very quickly and as a matter of urgency, because Yukon last year had the highest snowpacks ever recorded, and then sustained flooding in Whitehorse for months during the heat wave as the upstream glaciers and snowpacks melted very rapidly. And then this year, the snowpacks have broken the record again, or even higher. So they're really quite worried about the dams above Whitehorse and flooding in Dawson City and other places like this. So it's being used there. And that's just one example where it's providing a direct service that where the outputs of the model are sent to the forecasters every morning, and they can then help protect the communities through early warning in a region which never had a flood forecast available before from a model.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Does anyone else have questions for John? Please do, just unmute yourself and talk if you wish.
John, I have a question that has to do with CHM and the implementation for just more practical applications. And so it really looks quite forward to have a model that has variable sort of like grid spacing or spacing of the triangles, the triangular mesh, especially for deployment in the cloud and for real-time simulations of the snowpack. What do you think that is at this point where the model is, like how applicable it is to large basins, the way you guys implemented in Canada to do real-time simulations using the Canadian model for the forcing?
Yeah, well, we're just on a test basis providing the outputs from the model to the province of Alberta's Environment Department for their water supply prediction purposes, but we think it's scalable to the continental scale. We've only applied it to this section of northwestern North America right now, but we think we can do the whole continent, and I think there don't appear to be limits to scalability. It's not impossible with enough computer resources to run it globally.
Well, okay.
Which would be
fun. That's great.
That's exciting stuff, isn't it? It really starts to make some differences there. Okay,
yeah,
well,
and we've coupled it with SUMA, model that Martin Clark developed. So it's and some of that may feed into the new national water modeling project led out of this consortium called CAIRO, Cooperative Institute for Research and Operational Hydrology. So some of this may help in some of that eventually.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, John. We're about 40 minutes in, so this is perfect timing to transition to Rodica and her talk. As Rodica kind of takes control of the screen, just to reiterate that this is being recorded and certainly this will be archived so people can watch it at their leisure in the future. The only reason that I didn't suggest that in the email is because we are currently migrating our website. So thanks very much to guys at NSIDC who are allowing us to use the subsite of their web pages for Sinter stuff. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have all of the Sinter seminars archived, including this one, so people can access them on demand. So
and it's been a pleasure too. You know, we see this as benefiting NSIDC as well as the community. So this is all good.
It's much appreciated, Mark. You know, when you're asking people to do something and you have to say, we've got no money, can you do it for us? It's really nice when the answer is yes.
Oh, I know how that works.
Yeah, very often it's not. Anyway, without more to do. Rodica, who is representing the Global Cryosphere Watch, I won't introduce it anymore because that's the purpose of this particular talk. If you'd like to take the screen, please, Rodica, and be very keen to hear what you have. Sorry. Thank you. That looks great.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Once again,
Yes.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As I said in a message, I think to Nick, it's very hard to follow John. So I'm actually very grateful to have had the opportunity to listen to John's presentation and to see how much progress has been made from the High Mountain Summit. I would like to say hello to Dave Robinson. He's actually a contributor to some of the results that we will be speaking about in the next, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. And I'm grateful to Charles Fields, who has stepped in to help me put together quickly this presentation this morning. So as mentioned, I'm going to provide a very brief introduction to the Global Cryosphere Watch, an activity area of the World Meteorological Organization, and I'm sitting in Geneva at the WMO Secretariat, supporting the implementation of the Global Cryosphere Watch as a bridge between the scientific and operational communities with respect to cryosphere. So just a few words about the WMO, the fact that it is a UN specialized agency on water, climate, weather, water, climate, and environment. And it's an intergovernmental body, which is actually an important element in its efforts to bring the cryosphere at the same level as the weather, climate, hydrology, and to provide a systematic approach to the monitoring of the cryosphere at the global level. It has 193 members, so 193 countries that are member of WMO. And those decisions adopted by the members of WMO often have mandatory requirements. And I'm going to speak a bit about how snow has made it among the mandatory parameters to be observed systematically by operational agencies. So that's the outline, so an overview of the Global Cryosphere Watch. I would like to mention that it includes an expert team called SnowWatch, and many of the results that we'll be talking about come from that team. We'll talk specifically about the Snow Data International Exchange. about the data portal that GCW is developing as a connector between different data sources holding Cryosphere data, about the recently launched joint body on the status of mountain snow cover, concept of snow monitoring competence center, and about recent requirements for fostering greater collaboration to developing accurate snow monitoring products over mountains that would support operational climate services. So just in a nutshell, the Global Cryosphere Watch is, as I said, has a complementary role to the scientific communities, and has the primary mandate to link the operational services to the scientific communities when it comes to Cryosphere, and to enhance the Cryosphere monitoring and data exchange and utilization capabilities in the operational services. So for that, there are numerous tools that are being developed, a lot having to do with best practices, data standardization and exchange and so on, to support the various services that are coordinated within the framework of WMO. And obviously, it's not a secret to anyone that those regions where Cryosphere is present, snow is present, mountains, polar regions are still insufficiently monitored. Even more so, the data access and exchange is still a significant challenge, and the underutilization and loss of existing data sources is a problem due to fragmentation across different organizations. Yeah, I added the website of Global Cryosphere Watch on WMO's website here. So when I share the presentation, you could check more details on it. Here is a list of current activities on the GCW work plan. And as I mentioned, the sustaining Cryosphere observations and data systems is one, and the best practices for snow have been published. Glacier best observations for glaciers and ice caps to be published this year, permafrost and sea ice under development. And complementary to this, actually standards for data exchange and associated metadata are being developed. Snow already done, sea ice under discussions. Requirements for the observation and monitoring of Cryosphere for various applications, a lot having to do with operational applications, as well as statements of guidance on gaps are under development. This most often, the same as for the other parameters, become a reference for the evolution of observing systems and a significant reference for the space agencies. The functional Cryosphere Watch capabilities are really recommendations for existing services, whether monitoring, prediction, and the incorporation of additional indicators in such services. And a significant component of all WMO activities is focusing on support in terms of capacity development for those members with in developing countries where their current means are not sufficient to address the needs. And we are participating in such activities, whether it is Central Asia or South America. for example. An important component of the activities of GCW have been linked to the use of space-based data and products and support to fostering intercomparisons that would further enhance the understanding and the characterization of products. And I'm sure, I believe that many of you are associated with snowpacks, and that started, I believe, close to 10 years ago, the first snowpacks, and at one of at the first Snowwatch meeting in Toronto. And somewhere long-term, an integrated global cryosphere information system is the long-term goal of GCW. Very quickly, as I mentioned, the data standardization and data access are two important activities. The standardization has to do with development of standards. Data access is related to the activities, the development of the data portal, and the facilities required to convert native formats from the various operators to standardized formats that would allow the access to data, the NetCDF or buffer, if it's real time, still buffer. What you see here on the right is the map of CryoNet and contributing stations, so the GCW stations that were approved up to 2020. At that point, we used to manage them on a separate database, and realized that actually the value added comes from the integration into the WMO database, and this gives you a sense of the density of various observing stations and platforms that are currently active and do benefit from various levels of monitoring in terms of availability of data. And we are in process of transferring the GCW stations on the WMO database OSCAR platform. To the right, it's just a subset of the stations, and looking at how sparse the observations are mountain regions. And obviously there is a lot more that needs to be done in increasing the density of observations in these regions. Very quickly, this is how the web page of a registered station looks like, and this is Fuela Permafrost in Switzerland, and one facility that exists is to group stations according to their purpose. For example, if we talk about research purpose, or stations that belong to an institution, that are part of a dedicated project, and so on. This is a brief summary of the type of activities and engagements. As I mentioned, the data access and the data portal. You have here the address. So it's interoperable. It's a system hosted by Meteorological Institute of Norway. It's an interoperable system at metadata level with a multitude of data sources and centers that hold cryosphere data as well as any other data in areas where cryosphere is present. So it becomes actually, it is a broker of data, and what is not necessarily an assurance that data will be available. The access to data will depend on the policies regarding data of the respective data source. The other aspect that is actually an important component of SNOWatch is to support the data exchange in real time. And this is a graph that we produced, and it's a bit old, but what actually it emphasizes is that before GCW was established and mandated to look at the real-time exchange of data, there were very few relative to today stations that were making the data available consistently in the global telecommunication system for use by, for NWP and the climate reanalysis. And through the effort of SNOWatch, additional stations in China were started making their data available on GTS. And as you can see, over the course of 4 years, there was a significant increase in data availability. We haven't prepare again this graph as we are waiting for the United States. That's probably the last country that is yet to make its data available, its SNODEF data available in real time, but hopefully this will be done later on this year. For the bottom part, I'm going to invite Charles in a minute to mention more about. This is just another set of activities, as I mentioned earlier, the focus on satellite product intercomparison, utilization of satellite products in general, and the focus on the evaluation of their uncertainties. I mentioned about snowpacks, but since then, using the model of snowpacks in 2019, we've started consultations on developing a concept for a sea ice thickness product intercomparison. It was sea ice thickness and snow on sea ice, but not probably less than a month ago, ESA, based on the concept that was developed, has decided to fund the project for sea ice thickness only, and the project will be carried out between for the next 2 to 3 years, I believe. Number one on my list here refers to Cryosphere products that are being developed by teams in the Global Cryosphere Watch, whether assessments, trackers, or dedicated assessments that are being used regularly in WMO publications. And probably the most visible publication that WMO puts out every year is the State of the Global Climate, and it increasingly receives attention, and I am quite pleased to see that the number of the focus on cryosphere is growing every year. This is again with respect to the exchange of snow data, and what I was mentioning at the beginning. So again, the two graphs refer the change over the from 2014 to 2018 in the data made available, snow depth data made available. But since in 2021, WMO adopted a resolution on establishing the Global Basic Observing Network, which establishes specific requirements in terms of observations to support the global NWP, including reanalysis in support of climate monitoring. And as you can see, the requirement, so it's a requirement, it's not, it's a mandatory requirement, it's not optional, that precipitation in terms of hourly accumulation and snow depth shall be made available in a network with a horizontal resolution of 200 kilometers or higher for these variables, obviously including snow depth, and with an hourly frequency. For the time being, snow is only once a day still, but there is interest, and depending on the evolution of networks, to increase the frequency of the data made available. And this is where the WMO context offers the opportunity to come up with some clear and I'm going to say mandatory requirements that would enhance the sustainability of data being made available internationally. And maybe I should say that within the scope of WMO activities, of international organizations' activities in general, are those interests that are of regional or international in scope, and not of national scope. This is not necessarily a good representation of the data portal. It's so, as I said, it's hosted at Metno. Here you can see the interface for searching for data by parameter, by stations, by area, and it serves as a human interface as well as machine interfaces, and acts as a mediator between MET institutions and non-MET institutions. And it utilizes to a large degree the WMO data exchange, data access system. You can access the data portal from this link and can test some of the features that are available. And the stations that I showed earlier would increasingly have their data made available based, of course, on the specific policies via the data portal interface. And now I would like to invite Charles to actually give a few more details on some of the specific activities on the data access piece. Thanks.
Okay, so hi everybody. So what I would like just to present shortly is what we call data access made easy, in German DAME. DAME-I, interoperable. So we're really, what we want is to go from any station, research center, or even operational stations, going through some, like my colleague Matthias Bave, it's a presentation based on a presentation he had yesterday at EGU or today, kind of magic. You deliver then to the GCW portal data. So can you maybe show the text, please, Rodica? So one of the requirements here is that the whole thing is scalable, because it's not just, let's even dealing with 30 stations is not a big deal, but when you start to deal with 100 stations or even more, we saw that we may have to deal with 1,000 stations, and it still has to work. And that is something we work together with MetNode to make it happen. And next, please. And there we have the constraints. I mean, everybody has its own format, its own protocol. We saw the INARCH kind of a format and protocol. Next, and next too. And then we have, I mean, everybody, you know how we work as a researcher. We like to have our names for variables. But if we need to exchange and to share, we need to have a kind of standardization there, and also in units and other metadata. Next, please. So how do we implement this? That's with this open source Meteorological library that was developed by Matthias Bave and co-worker. And that reads the native data. And for this, you use one configuration file that needs to be provided by the data owner. That is everything on the left. And you can do this using a tool that was recently published. The paper was published, is Initial. It's also open source. And through this, then next, please, the next text. Meteorological, this engine, will convert the data to standard compliant netcdf CF 1.6 files and contain ACDD metadata. So we are really working with standards. It's not always easy because sometimes the standards, even the standards, don't contain everything you would like. And through the opened app, so there's it's again open network data access protocol. You deliver netCDFs to the GCW users. So in the end, it should be even possible to get some near real-time data with this system. So that is about the implementation of the data and the exchange. And the next slide, please. Here we start also to work together with, that was launched by the International Association of Cryospheric Sciences, together with GCW and the Mountain Research Initiative, this joint body on the status of the mountain snow cover. So maybe here we kind of start to touch what John was talking about before. And the main incentive for this that was brought forward by Wolfgang Schöner, one of the co-chairs, together with Sean Marshall and Li Huan Ma, was that somehow a global view of the snow, of the mountain snow cover is missing. So at NSIDC, you have this nice part that was developed by Karl Rittger, but it's the Rockies. We have parts or in the south, in the Andes that was developed by people in Mendoza, but a global view of the mountain snow cover is not there. So we have this joint body. It just started in the beginning of this year. You can register at these two addresses right now until the 24th of June, if you are interested to work with this. And one of the 4 work packages is really touching upon snow data quality control and homogenization, so that it can be used in climatology and hydrology. I think at the global level, that is really missing. And if we can work on this, that will be a really nice base for the next topic on the next slide. Something that we started to think of a few years ago within GCW and SnowWatch, the idea of snow monitoring competence centers, so that we would kind of establish competence hubs, and that would build up on the framework of WMO of measurement lead centers. One example is Sodankylä in Finland, that is such a center for precipitation and cryosphere. So building on that framework, we would like to have different hubs that provide expertise to questions regarding not only in situ, but also remote sensing measurements, best practices for snow variables, and also the developed standards for snow data quality checks. And if you look at this, then you recognize that with these snow monitoring competence centers, with time, we'll build up on what we get from the joint body on the status of mountain snow cover. And also about, we heard from Rodica right now, the snowpacks. And SnowWatch just recently started a discussion on the possibility to extend that to mountains. So that was not done until now, and that would be a very nice exercise that will feed into these competence centers. So back to you, Rodica.
Thank you, Charles. And I'm going to close by saying that both the joint body and the Snow Competence Center and the other activities have been noticed by the international community, by the WMO members and specific meteorological, hydrological services that are developing, in this case, around the Third Pole Regional Climate Center network. And they've requested from GCW to be the scientific advisor in terms of development of specific cryosphere products and services for the region. And actually discussions and the expectations from this network have led to the initial ideas about proposing a concept and socializing a concept for a snowpacks like experiment for mountains, given the fact that with the existing tools and the existing satellite products over the region, the countries involved are unable to provide the services that are expected from them by their communities. So this going back to the user-driven models and products that John was speaking about. And with this, I'd like to thank you. And I want to thank Charles and all of you for the invitation and the opportunity to run through a few of the activities of GCW. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rodica, and thank you, Charles, for commenting there as well. I think, so if anyone would like to type a question in the chat, please feel free, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. But one of the things touched on at the end there, and that links clearly with the INARCH, is about the sparsity of measurements in mountain environments. And this is touched on by a question by Martin Schneebly in the chat, which is there an exchange between INARCH model effort and GCW planned, or does it already exist?
Several of the stations that are run by John in Canada are already GCW stations. And I believe that initial efforts for linking The data portal, at least at metadata level, are underway. I have to admit that I don't know the details on that, but in the broader INARCH context, we've had a number of engagements and recognizing that several of the INARCH observatories are also, at least in part, recognized as Cryonet stations, and the need for stronger collaboration is absolutely there. So there are steps towards that, but it's not a fully functioning collaboration today. So opportunities for the future.
Yeah. John, do you want to comment further on that?
Yes, we've had GCW presentations at most of the INARCH meetings to encourage the INARCH members to participate in GCW and support it. And there are some committees in WMO that I've stayed engaged with and linked to in the Cryosphere to try to keep coordinating these efforts. So we're strongly supportive of everything WMO does, and see it as really as a way to organize the science to try to add some value and greater participation in Global Cryosphere Watch, which I think is a tremendously valuable effort. It's also convincing our national governments to make those resources available and contributions to do what they should be doing. And that's something where INARCH has some soft power, perhaps, to nudge some of these decision makers in the right directions.
No, it's a very good point. I think I mean, what was conspicuous in one of the slides you showed was the dearth of snow depth measurements, I believe, from the United States. And then you said clearly towards the end of this year, hopefully that's going to come online. How many more additional stations do you think you're going to add to the 2,392 that you currently use when they do come online?
Yeah, we've it's interesting. The open data started in the United States. The one that really opened it up was Reynolds Creek. Danny Marks publishing all the data sets in a water resources research special issue a few years ago, you know, the hydrology, the meteorology, as well as the snow. And that was because, you know, before we were all pretty secretive with our data, right? We intended to bury it with us so no one else would ever have it. So anyway, that started turning this idea around, and from the research scientist end, and the and it's helpful when people like Mark's were government scientists as well, so their agencies began to follow in that direction. The other things are, you know, Snowtail's been openly available for a long time, and other things like that. But but in terms of number of extra basins, there are some basins that are developing. You know, I didn't get into the details, but we have some categories in INARCH, and sort of some people have just set up and they don't have 5 years of data yet, and they've had some disruptions, but they're coming along, and they're going to be quite useful in a few years. So we see a way of mentoring these as well as being quite important.
Yeah, and if I could add, maybe I should have been a bit more clear, it's about the real-time data exchange. And really the issue there has been for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, the conversion to the internationally accepted format. Not the easiest format to work with, Buffer, but this is the format that is used for international exchange and for input to NWP. And this is where the contribution from the US has been highly sought after and will become a reality. I don't know how many stations, in fact. We are waiting to see, and we are already planning the celebration.
I'm not surprised. It sounds like it would almost maybe approach double what you started with in terms of the stations, which is a massive success. I think my thoughts were that, and other people would wish to have data made available that they're collecting normally, but then the difficulties of actually providing it in the formats with the metadata, everything become very, very tricky and sort of preclusive to doing so. So the idea of the data access made easy, and even just the imagery there of some of the links that could be made to then harness more data that is collected sounds really, really encouraging. Because yeah, the devil as always is in the detail. Most people wish to do it, but the hard bit is actually doing it. So yeah. Has anyone got any final questions? Anyone online or in the chat?
So yeah, I just want to touch base on something, because I imagine, and one of the things that Rodica and Charles talk about is using NetCDF and some other type of formats that could be homogenized for different models to be used, but then that will require that the format is published so that everybody can access it and then start putting it in such format. Is there a plan to publish that? Like how, like, so for us to know when we start just working on our own data sets, what is the plan to publish, what the format, the unified format will be once that's actually defined?
So over the next few years, and I'm not going to say 2, 3, 4, because some things in the world of international organizations move rather slowly. But about 2 or 3 years ago, there's been a decision in WMO that buffer will become the format of the past, and NetCDF will be the format of the future. So if you are familiar with buffer and all the regulations that come with it, the plan is to move to NetCDF in a and support in a similar fashion. So my colleagues who are responsible for data have they expect that by 2030 this will be fully implemented. So I hope that it will they will be able to deliver as they plan.
And is there an effort between INARCH and this particular effort to unify as well, like formats from the different groups that are trying to collect data, or
Well,
maybe Charles can answer that.
I mean, as you heard before from John and Rodica, I mean, the collaboration between INARCH and GCW needs to be strengthened. Well, I guess that right now, I mean, your question, if we use DAME, we have the NetCDF CF. So it is not easy to work with NetCDF right now. So we follow the CF convention. And if you have data that you want to read and to produce into NetCDF to see how it works, you can use already Meteorological and Initial to produce that. That's no problem. But I cannot guarantee that then WMO in the end ends up with exactly the same format. But my colleague Matthias Bave and our colleague Øystein Godoy, they both are in the task teams and expert teams that developed these standards. So this DAME is not done just in the sky. We try to really to work on it, and that it's something that can be used by researchers.
And if I could add, Øystein Godoy and I believe Matthias as well are also part of the Arctic Data Committee, so which is a large and I'm going to say quite active committee of data experts that are trying to harmonize. They're working towards harmonizing the data sets from the Arctic monitoring and research projects. And a lot of what is being implemented at the GCW data portal reflects the advances and the agreement of the research community, especially in the Arctic. But there is coordination with SCAR and the Antarctic research community as well. So it's not really done in isolation, but with collaboration of large research communities. And through Oystein, through Matthias and others, there is input from those communities and advice to WMO for the adoption and changes to the data formats. The advantage in WMO is that once adopted, there is actually the mechanism and the system behind it to sustain it, publish it, and maintain it. It takes longer, but it's actually sustainable.
That's great. Thank you so much. Right, so we've reached the end of our allotted time for today. So just a couple of things. One is to again thank John and Rodica and Charles for two excellent presentations, giving lots of information, which I'm sure is of broad interest to the wide community. Secondly, it's that the next meeting will be in about 3 months' time, so it'll probably be about late August, early September time, and we'll send emails out about that in due course. And finally, just we hope to have a kind of a migration, a new version of the website up and running. When that's there, we'll start communicating probably with a bit more frequency, and this will be archived and placed on that when the time comes. So to say thank you very much for everyone who's tuned in. I hope you found it useful. I certainly have. And thanks again to our speakers today. Thanks, Scrum. Have a good day.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks very
Bye.
much.
Thank you all.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.